Daily Words of God.
Some people like to infer and imagine, but how far can man's imagination reach? Can it go beyond this world? Is man capable of inferring and imagining the authenticity and accuracy of God's authority? Are the inference and imagination of man capable of allowing him to achieve a knowledge of God's authority? Can they make man truly appreciate and submit to the authority of God? Facts prove that the inference and imagination of man are only a product of man's intellect, and provide not the slightest help or benefit to man's knowledge of God's authority. After reading science fictions, some are able to imagine the moon and what the stars are like. Yet this does not mean that man has any understanding of the authority of God. Man's imagination is just that, imagination. Of the facts of these things, which is to say, of their connection to God's authority, he has absolutely no grasp. So what if you have been to the moon? Does this show that you have a multi-dimensional understanding of God's authority? Does it show that you are able to imagine the breadth of God's authority and power? Since the inference and imagination of man are incapable of allowing him to know the authority of God, what should man do? The wisest option would be to not infer or imagine, which is to say that man must never rely on imagination and depend on inference when it comes to knowing the authority of God. What is it I wish to say to you here? Knowledge of God's authority, God's power, God's own identity, and God's substance cannot be achieved by relying on your imagination. Since you cannot rely on imagination to know the authority of God, then in what way can you achieve a true knowledge of God's authority? Through eating and drinking the words of God, through fellowship, and through experiencing the words of God, you will have a gradual experience and verification of God's authority, and thus you will gain a gradual understanding and incremental knowledge of it. This is the only way to achieve the knowledge of God's authority. There are no shortcuts. Asking you not to imagine is not the same as making you sit passively to await destruction or stopping you from doing anything. Not using your brain to think and imagine means not using logic to infer, not using knowledge to analyze, not using science as the basis, but instead appreciating, verifying, and confirming that the God you believe in has authority, confirming that He holds sovereignty over your fate, and that His power at all times proves Him to be the true God Himself. Through the words of God, through the truth, through everything that you encounter in life. This is the only way that anyone can achieve an understanding of God. Some say that they wish to find a simple way of achieving this aim. But can you think of such a way? I tell you, there's no need to think. There are no other ways. The only way is to conscientiously and steadfastly know and verify what God has and is through every word that He expresses and everything that He does. This is the only way to know God. For what God has and is, and everything of God, is not hollow and empty, but real.